Excellence for Gravitational Wave Discovery based here in Australia. Today, we are bringing you the second in our series of live stream talks. These talks are to showcase the work and interest of our researchers and give them the opportunity to share some of the science that they love. So today's speaker is Isobel Romero-Shaw. She is based at Monash University here in Victoria in Australia. She is a PhD candidate in astrophysics and a member of OzGrav's research collaborative. Isobel investigates what we can learn about black hole habitats using gravitational waves. And she also loves to make habitats for little creatures as well, and currently has 5 pet garden snails. So that's very cute, and I love that. So Isobel is going to start giving her talk in a few moments, but please post your questions on the YouTube chat, and at the end of the talk, we will return to those, and hopefully Isobel will have some time to answer those questions for you. So now we will head over to Isobel to share her talk titled Etymology of the Universe.
Great, thank you, Jackie. Okay, cool. So as Jackie said, I'm a PhD student and I study gravitational wave astrophysics at Monash University. But today I'm going to deviate from my usual topic of study and tell you about something that I've been getting interested in recently, which is etymology, which is also known as the study of the origin and evolution of words. So this is quite a new field to me, so while I welcome your questions, I don't promise to be able to actually answer anything, but maybe we can have some interesting discussions. So since I actually study astrophysics as my day job, I've chosen to give this talk on the etymology of the universe, or as I like to think of it, star words. Anyway, the problem with studying the origin of words is that we use words all the time. So once you start thinking about where they come from, it's very hard to stop. And this has made researching for this presentation both very interesting and very time consuming. To give you an idea of how interesting everyday words can be, let's dive into where some of the words on this slide come from. So the word etymology comes from the Greek words for original meaning and the study of. So you can probably think of lots of words that end with ology, like biology, neurology, epidemiology, that all refer to different fields of study. And we can also look at the etymology of names. So my first name, Isobel, is the Scottish version of the Spanish Isabel, which evolved from the medieval name Elizabeth and has its roots in the Hebrew name Elisheba, which means God is my oath. The first half of my last name is a Spanish or Italian surname, meaning something like coming from Rome. So it might have referred to somebody who was actually from Rome or somebody who had been there on a pilgrimage. And the last half of my last name is Scottish and stems from the Old English word for copse or thicket, and is a name that would have been given to somebody who lived near the woods. So in its entirety, my name means something like God-fearing woman from Rome who lives near the woods, which sadly is not a very accurate description of an atheist from England who lives in suburban Melbourne. So after I thought about the word etymology and also my own name, I started thinking about my job description. So the word astrophysics can be split into 2 parts, with the first part, astro, coming from the ancient Greek aster, meaning a star, which in itself stems from a word that is something like stir, the Proto-Indo-European word for star. So this term, Proto-Indo-European, will come up a few times in this talk, so I better go over what it means. Back in the late Neolithic and early Bronze Ages, the Proto-Indo-European people are thought to have lived somewhere around what is now modern-day Ukraine. They then spread out into Europe and India, taking with them one common language, Proto-Indo-European, that then grew and evolved into the many European and Indian languages that we have today. For example, the English word 100 shares this Proto-Indo-European root with loads of other languages. So this word evolved through a number of stages into the modern words for 100 that we recognize today. Just a warning that a lot of words are about to appear on the screen, and I don't expect you to read all of them. The English word for 100 is up here at the top left, and you can also see things that you might recognize. like the French word for 100, the German word for 100, and things like that that you might have learned at school. So Proto-Indo-European words for things are theorized by linguists and etymologists who are experts in the way that words evolve. They look for a way to link all of the modern day words for things in lots of different languages to one common source. So a lot of the words that I talk about today can actually be traced all the way back to their Proto-Indo-European root. For example, going back to the word astrophysics, the second half, physics, can be traced through its Latin and Greek evolution as physica, meaning the natural things, back to its more primitive roots as a word related to making things grow, like a farmer might. Ta physica, meaning something like the natural things, was also the name of Aristotle's treatise on nature. The word student can also be traced back to a Proto-Indo-European root, meaning to push or to beat, which brings up some nice imagery of beating knowledge into your brain as you study. And what about the word universe? Well, we're actually going to build up to that over the course of this talk, but for now, let's start our exploration of the word universe from the very place that all of our explorations of the universe have begun, the planet Earth. The Earth wasn't always thought of as an astrophysical entity, which explains why our word for the Earth is the same as our word for the ground or the soil. This is how humans have known the Earth for most of their evolution, as the soil that allows them to grow food and survive. There are other words for figures that have been goddesses of the Earth or guardians of the soil and agriculture, like the Roman Terra, the Greek Gaia, and the Norse figure Jord. And these are some of the roots of words that we use that are related to the Earth today. For example, the word terrestrial for something that comes from the Earth, and geology for the study of the Earth's substance. So just some history of our understanding of Earth's place in the universe. Earth was recognized as spherical by the end of the 5th century BC by Greek intellectuals, but it was believed to be the center of the universe until the 16th century. And before the 19th century, it was widely believed that the Earth was only a couple of thousand years old. But in the 19th century, geologists proved that it's actually billions of years old. But way before we recognized the Earth as a planet in itself, we noticed that we seemed to have some relatively nearby neighbors that differed from the background stars that we saw in the night sky. For example, one really obvious one is the sun. The sun has always been seen as extremely important in human civilization, largely because the sun was seen to dictate day and night, as well as the seasons, crops, harvest, and everything by which primitive humans live their lives. The Proto-Indo-European root of the word sun also evolved into another familiar word for things relating to the sun, sol, which we use for things like the solar eclipse and the solar system. Sol was also the name of the Roman god of the sun, Sol Invictus, or the unconquered sun. And he's usually depicted with this kind of crown or corona because of the corona that we saw around the sun. Another very important heavenly body that we noticed pretty early on was the moon. Our word for the moon stems from a Proto-Indo-European word that meant month, as well as the measuring moon. So was the moon that measured the length of the month. And in fact, the very word measure is linked to this word. Another Proto-Indo-European word was used for the shining moon. So a different word was used for that, which evolved into the Latin luna, which was also the name of the Roman moon goddess, who was the sister of Sol Invictus. And this word is also the root of many of the words that we use to talk about things relating to the moon, like the lunar eclipse. So another thing that people noticed very early on was that some of the stars in the sky move differently to the others. While most stars appeared to move very slowly due to the rotation of the Earth and also the Earth's movement around the sun, some appeared to move much faster or in different directions, so they didn't follow the crowd in the same way. The word planet can't be traced back to its Proto-Indo-European root, but the ancient Greek name for wandering stars evolved into our modern day word planet. So from Earth, we could see 5 planets with the naked eye. We could see Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And each of these planets have names that derive from the names of Roman gods. So first up, we have Mercury. Mercury is named after Mercurius, the Roman god of travel, tricks, and commerce, who was known for his speed. Mercury was seen to move fastest across the sky, so quite sensibly was named after the fastest god. So as an aside, this is also why the metal that we use in thermometers is called mercury or quicksilver. So as a metal that's liquid at room temperature, it appears to be relatively fast moving. So it's named after the fastest god. Mercurius's equivalents were the Greek Hermes and the Norse god Loki. The name Mercurius derives from the Latin merx, originally from Proto-Italic merc, which was used to refer to goods and merchandise. So this is actually where we get words like merchandise and merchant and market. Another planet that we could clearly see in the night sky was Venus, which is the brightest planet in the sky and was hence named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty. The Roman goddess Venus, who was famously very beautiful, was married to Vulcan, the god of fire and the forge, who was notoriously a very ugly god. And this seems apt to me, since we now know that the surface of Venus is completely inhospitable to life and is full of volcanoes and things. The word Venus was the Latin word for romantic love and desire, stemming from the Proto-Indo-European word meaning to strive for love. So interestingly, this root word is also the root word for words relating to things like winning and friendship and love and also hunting, which I think kind of makes sense. So the next planet, Mars, appeared to have a distinctly red hue in the sky, so was named after the Roman god of war. There's been a god of war or an embodiment of war for as far back as I could trace, and the name Mars stems from an Oscan word, which also referred to a war god. So Oscan is another extinct language. It's a Proto-Italic language that was native to southern Italy, and it's known from inscriptions dating back as far as the 5th century BC. So I looked up these inscriptions online and they look really amazing. So I'd encourage you to go and Google them if you have the time. So the later Latin word for Mars, which is something like mavors, which is here at the top, is linked for words meaning to cut, to turn, and also male. Mars, the planet, has 2 small moons, which were discovered much later in the 19th century when we had telescopes. And these 2 small moons are named after the chariot horses of the Greek god of war, Ares, which were called Phobos, which means panic or fear, and Deimos, which means terror or dread. So that's all very nice. Another planet that the Romans could see was Jupiter, who was the largest planet they could see, and so who they named after their king of the gods. The equivalent Greek god to Jupiter is Zeus, and they actually have the same Indo-European root word, which means bright day sky or heaven. The other half of Jupiter stems from the Proto-Italic word for father, making the whole word effectively sky father. And the word for father itself comes from the Proto-Indo-European word for protector or shepherd. So that's all quite nice, I think. And the 5th planet that could be seen by the Romans with the naked eye was Saturn. Saturn was the slowest planet to cross the sky, which might be why it was named after the Roman god of time, Saturnus, equivalent to the Greek Kronos, and often depicted as a kind of old father time with a scythe. Saturn was also the god of agriculture, and his name stems from the Latin satis, meaning sufficient or plenty, basically satisfied, which obviously shares the same root word. So just having 5 planets in the sky was all well and good until about the 18th century, when along came William Herschel with his telescope and discovered a new planet. By the way, the word telescope can be traced back to Greek and essentially means I look at something far away. This word was coined in the year 1611 at a banquet where one of Galileo Galilei's instruments was presented. So Herschel's discovery of Uranus is a particularly interesting topic for me because Herschel was living in my hometown of Bath in the UK when he made this discovery. He lived in Bath with his sister Caroline, who is pictured here making a cup of tea while he polishes a telescope mirror. So Caroline Herschel worked as William Herschel's assistant, and King George III paid Caroline £50 a year for this role, which made her the first woman, at least in England, to be given a salary as an astronomer. Caroline made many discoveries of her own right. Mostly these were comets. The word comet stems from the Greek word meaning long-haired, referencing the long tail of a shooting star. And related to that, the word asteroid stems from the Greek for star-like. But back to Herschel's discovery. Herschel actually wanted to call his new planet Georgium Sidus, or George's star, after King George. But this name didn't stick, largely because the French hated King George and so wouldn't call it that. Eventually, the name Uranus was proposed, and since it was thought to be kind of in keeping with the other planets, which were also named after ancient deities, that name stuck. Uranus was a Greek god, though, not a Roman god, which is kind of irritating to those of us who like everything to just have one consistent theme. But there you go, there you have it, we can't change it now. So Uranus was the ancient Greek king of the sky, who actually was thought to be the sky and was married to Gaia, who was the Greek embodiment of and the goddess of the earth. The name Uranus stems from the Indo-European root meaning to rain, making Uranus the rainmaker. The next planet to be discovered by telescope was Neptune in 1846, which was named after the Roman god of the sea due to its bright blue color. The etymology of the name Neptune is widely disputed and unclear. It has links to words like nuptus, meaning veiling, and related to words like nuptial, potentially relating to the marriage of the sky and the sea. It's also linked to an Indo-European word meaning damp or fog, which is linked to the word neptu, which means something that is moist. And given the adjectival form neptuno, which means he who is moist, this sounds a lot like the word Neptune. However, the word is also linked to the root of the word nephew, which is linked to various stories and myths where a sea deity is born out of the waves. So we don't really know where this name actually comes from. And finally, for the planets, a planet that was identified in 1930 and then unidentified in 2006 was Pluto. Pluto was named by an 11-year-old girl from England called Venetia Burney. The name Pluto was confirmed on May the 1st, 1930, so almost exactly 90 years ago. And Venetia got £5 as an award for proposing the winning name, which was worth about £300 in those times, or 600 Australian dollars, which is apt because Pluto, or Pluton, was the Roman god of both the underworld and of wealth. And here's Pluto looking very sad because he's not a planet anymore. So Pluto, being the god of both the underworld and of wealth, isn't as kind of dark and morbid as it sounds. Precious metals and gems do come from beneath the Earth's surface, aka the underworld, so maybe it makes sense actually that Pluto, or Hades, would have been the guardian of valuable metals. The name Pluto comes from the Proto-Indo-European root word meaning to flow, and probably evolved into words meaning wealth and riches due to the concept of overflowing. Pluto actually has 5 moons, the largest of which is Charon. Charon is about half the size of Pluto and is named after the Greek mythological ferryman who would ferry the dead across the river Styx to the underworld. Another of the moons is named Styx, while the others are named Nyx, after the Greek goddess of the darkness and the mother of Charon. Kerberos, the 3-headed dog that guarded the Greek underworld, and Hydra, the 9-headed serpent that battles Hercules in Greek mythology. Okay, so we've gone through the planets, but once we had telescopes, we could also start observing and naming things in the universe that we hadn't been able to resolve previously, like nebulae. The word nebula comes to us from Latin, where it meant mist or cloud. In its earliest English uses in the 1600s, nebula referred to a cloudy speck or film on the eye, which caused vision problems. And it first applied to great interstellar clouds of gas and dust in the early 1700s. You can imagine how this word would evolve from meaning a cloudy speck on the eye to a cloudy speck in a telescope, which will actually eventually turn out to be a huge cloud of interstellar dust and gas. When we had telescopes, we also noticed that many of the bright specks in the night sky weren't single stars after all, but whole galaxies like our own, the Milky Way. And actually, the word Galaxias in Latin was used to refer to the Milky Way itself, stemming from the Greek words for milky, Galaxias, and circle or cycle, kaiklos. the Greek word galactos actually just means milk. And this is from the root of our word, this is from the root word galag, which is the Proto-Indo-European word for milk, and is also the same root of our word for the sugar that's found in milk, which is lactose. So our word for all other galaxies stems from the word that we use to describe our own to begin with, which was just milky. So finally, we've reached the end of our short trip through some of the words that we use to describe the universe. And here's the grand finale, which is the word universe itself. So altogether, the word universe stems from the Latin word universus, which means all things turned into one thing. As you might guess, the word uni stems from words meaning one or unique. And the second half of the word means turned into, which actually comes from the original Proto-Indo-European word for turn or bend. Versus also means a line of writing. And the Old French verse, as well as the English verse, mean a line of song. So universe might be translated as written into one or sung into one. And I think this is actually quite poetic, as humans have always sought to describe and record the world that they see around them. And in some sense, I think the word universe might also be apt for describing the entirety of the human language, because it records everything that we know about everything that we discover as we evolve. And that's it. So thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed learning about the history of these star words as much as I have.
All right, thank you, Isobel, for that fabulous talk. And we do have a little bit of time here for some questions. So if you're on the stream, you can pop them into the chat box, and we'll pass them on to Isobel. But one to start with is, that we got was, why isn't Pluto a planet now?
Pluto isn't a planet now because we discovered that there were lots of other things around the same orbital distance as Pluto that were either as big or bigger than Pluto, and there was no real reason for those to not be considered planets if Pluto was a planet. And there are also things about it not having cleared its orbital path, so there are other things that kind of orbit within the same region that mean that it isn't a planet anymore. But there are lots of people who are up in arms about this, who really want Pluto to be a planet still.
Well, your Pluto did look very sad. So
he's very sad.
So another question, which this is one that I wanted to ask, so I'll use my right as host to throw a question at you. Mm-hmm. What surprised you most when you were researching for this talk?
That's a great question. There were lots of surprises. I think one of the things that actually surprised me was how far we can trace back the origins of words. Because like the Proto-Indo-European words for things, they aren't recorded. They aren't written down anywhere. They're just kind of hypothesized by people who take all of the words that we do know and all of the routes that we can go through to trace those back to Latin and Sanskrit and things like that, and then use what they know about how languages evolve to trace everything back to one common root. I just thought that was amazing.
Yeah, it's such a wonderfully diverse set of words that you can trace back, but the ability to be able to trace them back so far is pretty astonishing.
It's really cool. And I also, sorry, I'm just going to go off on one now, but something else that was really interesting through this was how much the language is related, and the evolution of the language is related to the movement of humans and how humans themselves evolved. And these root words are often related to things that are not really that similar to what they're used for today, but you can see how the concept of that word would have been applied in the more primitive lifestyle that they had at that time. It's just very interesting.
Yeah. Well, we're getting some great comments coming in on our chat about your about your talk and how interesting people think it is, and they actually are going to incorporate some of this into their astronomy classes. So
awesome.
We definitely appreciate that. And just, we've got a couple more minutes. I was going to, there's another question that came in, and it says, do other galaxies have names?
Yes, they do. They were named, so they're named obviously later because people couldn't see them with the naked eye. So for example, Andromeda is a galaxy that's named.
Okay, great. And so I think got time for one final question here. So what was your inspiration for just, diving into this new interest?
I'm really not sure. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts recently because I've got a lot of free time. And some of the things that are covered in those podcasts are things like interesting facts, which were sometimes about the roots of words. And I guess, I just started thinking about, the evolution of humans as well, because I've been reading some books recently about the evolution of humans as a species. So kind of tying those things together with my research as well is kind of where I went into this from.
Right. Well, great. So that kind of brings us to the end of our Q&A time. So again, thank you, Isobel, for giving this talk today. I do want to just mention that next week we will have another live stream talk here on the OzGrav YouTube channel, and this will be by another one of our great researchers from Monash, Ilya Mandel, and he will be giving a talk called Singing Binaries, Listening to the Chirps of Black Holes, and that's going to be at 12 p.m. Melbourne time next week on Thursday. So please meet us back here next week, and we look forward to continuing to share the science of our researchers.